Welcome to the Fear Files channel. Today we will delve into one of the darkest and most mysterious crimes in British history, a case that still sparks debate and keeps criminologists and researchers on edge. We're talking about the Cannock Chase murders, a series of crimes that shook the quiet English countryside in the 1960s. Cannock Chase is a vast area of forests and heathland in Staffordshire, in central England. A picturesque place, but at the same time isolated. Dense forests, winding trails, areas where it's easy to lose your bearings. In the 1960s, this forest was a popular spot for family walks, picnics, berry picking. No one could have imagined that these peaceful woods would become the site of a tragedy that would change the life of an entire region. The first victim was Christine Darby, a 9-year-old girl who disappeared on January 1st, 1967. Imagine the New Year holidays when families gather together, children rejoice in their gifts, and a festive atmosphere reigns all around. Christine set off to visit her grandmother, who lived nearby. The route was short, familiar. The girl walked along streets she had known since childhood, but she never reached her grandmother. She simply vanished into thin air. The search began immediately. Police, volunteers, neighbors, everyone searched for the girl. They combed through streets, questioned residents, checked every house. But no trace. Christine disappeared without a trace, as if she had never existed. The family was in despair. The police worked around the clock, but days passed and no leads appeared. Several months later, on August 15th, 1967, Christine's body was discovered in Cannock Chase Forest. The location was approximately 20 kilometers from where the girl had disappeared. Her body was partially hidden in dense undergrowth. The condition of the remains made the investigation difficult. Over the months that had passed, nature had taken its course. Determining the exact cause of death was difficult, but it became clear that the girl had been a victim of violence. This discovery shocked the entire region. Parents became more vigilant. Children were no longer allowed to go out alone, even for short distances. But the worst was yet to come. Just a few weeks after Christine's body was discovered, on September 8th, 1967, another girl went missing, 5-year-old Diane Tift. She was walking near her home, playing on the street, as children normally do. Her mother was distracted for just a few minutes, and when she came out to check on her daughter, she was gone. Again searches, again despair, again no traces. The next day, September 9th, Diane's body was found in the same Cannock Chase forest, not far from where Christine had been discovered. The body lay at the foot of a slope, partially covered with branches and foliage. This time, because so little time had passed, experts were able to establish more details. The girl had been strangled. There were no signs of sexual assault, which made the perpetrator's motive even more incomprehensible. Panic gripped the entire area. Two similar crimes in such a short time could not be a coincidence. It became obvious that a serial killer was operating in the region, hunting children. The police doubled their efforts. Raids were organized, searches, hundreds of people were questioned. They checked everyone who could in any way be connected to these places. Patrols were strengthened. Safety talks were held in schools. Despite all the precautions, on August 19th, 1968, almost exactly a year after the first discovery, a third girl disappeared. 7-year-old Margaret Reynolds was riding her bicycle not far from her friend's house. This was during the day in a relatively crowded place. But when a friend came out to call Margaret, she was gone. The bicycle was left abandoned by the road. This time a body was found quickly. The next day, August 20th, again in Cannock Chase, again in the same area of the forest. Margaret had been strangled, like Diane. Again, no signs of sexual assault were found. The perpetrator acted quickly and left minimal clues. 3 girls, 3 families destroyed by grief, an entire region living in fear. The perpetrator seemed to be taunting the police, returning again and again to the same forest, leaving bodies where they would certainly be found. What was this? A challenge? A message? Or simply a convenient place for him? The investigation reached enormous proportions. This was one of the largest police investigations in Britain at that time. More than 5,000 people were questioned. Many automobiles were checked. Witnesses mentioned suspicious cars in the area of the abductions. They compiled lists of everyone who had access to the forest, who worked in that area, who frequently visited there. Various theories emerged. One of the main hypotheses was that the perpetrator used an automobile. Witnesses reported a strange man in a car who allegedly offered children rides or handed out sweets. Several people saw a gray car, possibly an Austin 855, in the area of the abductions. This gave hope. There weren't that many owners of such cars. They could be checked. The police compiled photo-fit portraits based on witness descriptions. A middle-aged man, nothing particularly remarkable. That was precisely the problem. He looked ordinary, didn't arouse suspicion. There were thousands of such men. One of the main suspects was Raymond Leslie Morris. This is a name to remember because most of the investigation revolved around this person. Morris worked as a construction engineer, was married, owned his own house. At first glance, an ordinary, respectable citizen. But he had a gray Austin 855, and he often visited the Cannock area on business. Morris came into police view thanks to an anonymous call. Someone reported that this person was behaving strangely, that his car had been seen near the abduction sites. The police began surveillance. They established that Morris indeed regularly drove along roads near the forest, often stopped in places where there was no obvious necessity. But Morris was cautious. There was no direct evidence against him. He was questioned several times, but each time he gave plausible explanations for his movements. Work, the need to check sites, random stops. He had alibis for some dates, though not all. The police couldn't present enough evidence for an arrest. Meanwhile, the investigation was reaching a dead end. Months, years passed. No new abductions occurred. After Margaret Reynolds' death, the crimes stopped as suddenly as they had begun. This, too, was a mystery. Why did the killer stop? Did he move away? Was he arrested for another crime? Or did he simply lie low, fearing that the police had gotten too close? In 1969, the police conducted a search of Morris's house. They looked for any leads, clothing, weapons, anything that could connect him to the crimes. They found something interesting, but insufficient for a murder charge. In the house, they discovered a collection of indecent materials, which was illegal at the time. Morris was arrested precisely for this: possession and distribution of pornography. He received a short sentence, but the police didn't leave him alone. They were certain that Morris was involved in the girls' murders. They continued gathering evidence, hoping to find something decisive. They studied his past, questioned acquaintances, colleagues, relatives. It turned out that Morris had oddities in his behavior, especially regarding children. Some neighbors recalled how he watched playing children too attentively, how he offered to give rides to other people's girls. In 1970, Morris stood trial on charges of attempted abduction. This involved another girl, not connected to the Cannock murders. A 10-year-old girl reported that a strange man tried to lure her into a car, offering to show her kittens. She managed to escape and remembered the car's license plate number. The car belonged to Morris. At trial, he was found guilty and sentenced to 10 years in prison. This was a success for the police, but a bitter one. Morris was imprisoned for attempted abduction, but not for 3 murders. There was still insufficient evidence. The girls' bodies hadn't given criminalists the clues that could irrefutably point to the killer. There are no fingerprints, hairs, other biological traces that could be matched. DNA analysis wasn't yet used in forensics at that time. This technology only appeared in the 80s. Morris was released from prison in 1979. The police continued to monitor him, but no new incidents occurred. He lived quietly, tried not to attract attention. Raymond Leslie Morris died in 2014, never having been officially charged with the Cannock Chase murders. But the story didn't end there. With the development of technology, hope appeared to review old evidence. In the 1990s and 2000s, the police returned to the case several times, applying new forensic methods. They tried to extract DNA from preserved physical evidence, rechecked witness statements, studied archives. In 2012, shortly before Morris's death, the police conducted a new investigation. Some victims' bodies were exhumed for re-examination. Modern analysis methods that didn't exist in the 60s were applied. They hoped to find something, anything, that would allow them to finally close the case. The results were ambiguous. Yes, new data appeared, but it still wasn't enough to file charges. By that time, Morris was old and sick. Even if new evidence had been found, it was unclear whether he could stand trial. There has always been much controversy around the Morris case. Some researchers and police officers are still convinced that he was the Cannock Chase killer. There were too many coincidences: the car, place of work, behavior, conviction for attempted abduction. Everything pointed to him, but direct evidence was never found. Other experts are less categorical. They point out that fixation on only one suspect could have led to the real perpetrator remaining outside the field of view. History knows many cases when police were certain of a person's guilt, but it later turned out they were innocent. In fairness, it should be noted that against Morris, in addition to circumstantial evidence, there were witness statements who saw him or his car in suspicious places. But witness testimony, especially after time has passed, can be unreliable. People's memory is selective, subject to influence, can be distorted. There is another version, less popular but still worthy of attention. Some researchers suggested that the murders could have been committed by different people. Perhaps the first murder was a single case, and the subsequent ones were imitations. Or all 3 crimes weren't connected to each other, but simply coincided in time and place. This is unlikely, but such a possibility cannot be completely ruled out. There was also a version that the perpetrator could have been among visitors, someone who periodically appeared in the region for work or other business, committed crimes and left. This would explain why after 1968 the murders stopped. Perhaps this person simply stopped coming to Staffordshire. An interesting point is the psychological profile of the perpetrator. Criminal psychologists who studied the case noted several characteristic features. First, the perpetrator chose young girls, which indicated certain pathological inclinations. Second, he acted quickly and decisively. Very little time passed from the moment of abduction to murder. Third, he returned to the same place to leave the bodies. This could be related to the fact that he knew this area well, felt safe there. The absence of signs of sexual assault in 2 of the 3 cases also puzzled experts. Usually in such crimes, the sexual motive is primary. But here the situation was different. Perhaps for the killer, the abduction and murder itself gave him what he was looking for, a sense of power control. Or he was impotent, and his crimes were a distorted attempt to compensate for this. The victims' families lived with this pain for decades. Christine, Diane, and Margaret's parents never learned who killed their daughters, never received the closure that justice provides. Some of the relatives live to our time and still hope that someday the truth will come out. The public also hasn't forgotten about these crimes. The Cannock Chase murders became part of British criminal history. Books have been written about them, documentary films made. The case is regularly mentioned in the context of solved and unsolved serial murders. Cannock Chase Forest has changed since then. Today, it's still a popular place for walks and recreation, but the memory of the tragedy remains. Local residents of the older generation remember those terrible years when parents were afraid to let children out of the house. Young people know about these events from stories. There are those who avoid certain sections of the forest where the bodies were found, considering them cursed. From a forensic standpoint, the Cannock Chase case is interesting in that it demonstrates the limitations of technology at that time. In the 1960s, police didn't have the tools available today. There were no DNA databases, computer systems for data analysis, modern forensic examination methods. The investigation was conducted using traditional methods: interviews, surveillance, analysis of physical evidence by means available at the time. If these crimes had occurred today, the probability of solving them would be much higher. Surveillance cameras, phone tracking, DNA analysis, digital forensics, all this would significantly complicate the perpetrator's task. But in the 60s, it was easier for the killer to hide his tracks. Nevertheless, even with limited technology, the police did enormous work. The scale of the investigation was impressive. Thousands questioned, hundreds of versions checked, round-the-clock work by detectives. They were close to solving it. Morris was under close attention. He was tried for other crimes. The smallest thing was missing, that decisive clue that would connect him to the murders irrefutably. There's an opinion that Morris knew he was being watched and was very careful. Perhaps that's precisely why he stopped the murders after 1968. He realized the risk was too great, that one more crime could be fatal. Or his arrest in 1969 for possession of pornography frightened him so much that he no longer dared to act. Another version, Morris really was guilty, but managed to destroy all evidence before the police conducted the search. He had time. From the start of the investigation to the search, enough time passed to get rid of compromising things. Clothing, murder weapons, any items that could connect him to the victims. All this could be destroyed, burned, thrown away in an inaccessible place. It's also interesting to consider the geography of the crimes. All three girls were abducted in different places, but the bodies were found in the same forest in a relatively close area to each other. This suggests that the perpetrator didn't just randomly choose Cannock Chase, but deliberately used this place. Perhaps he worked there, hunted, frequently visited for other reasons, and knew where to hide a body, so it wouldn't be found immediately, but not so well that it would disappear forever. The fact that bodies were found relatively quickly, within a day or months, is also important. The perpetrator didn't bury them deeply, didn't try to completely conceal them. This could be due to lack of time, fear of being noticed in the process, or it was part of his plan. Some serial killers get pleasure from the fact that their victims are found, from the shock and horror this causes in society. Morris, assuming he was the killer, could have enjoyed the chaos that followed the discovery of the bodies, could have read newspapers, listened to radio, observed people's reactions, and felt his power over the situation. This is a common trait among serial criminals. The desire to be aware of the investigation, sometimes even to make contact with police under the guise of a witness or helper. There's no documented evidence that Morris behaved this way, but that doesn't mean he didn't. He could have been more careful, observing from afar, not drawing attention to himself. The impact of these murders on the local community was enormous. In the 1960s, Britain hadn't yet faced such prominent cases of serial child murders. Of course, crimes against children had always occurred, but such a series, such concentration in one place and time, this was something new and frightening. Parents became paranoid about protecting their children. Those who previously walked freely on the streets were now not let out of the house without supervision. Schools introduced additional security measures. Police conducted talks with children about how to behave with strangers, how not to get into strange cars. All this seems obvious today, but in those times, such a level of wariness was new. Attitudes toward the forest also changed. Cannock Chase had always been a favorite recreation spot, but after the murders, many stopped going there, especially with children. The forest became associated with danger, with something sinister. Years passed before this reputation began to change, but it hasn't completely disappeared to this day. There were also positive changes, if one can say so, in the context of tragedy. These murders pushed police to improve methods of investigating crimes against children. Specialized units began to be created. Protocols for working with such cases were developed. The experience gained in investigating the Cannock Chase murders was used in subsequent years when working on other cases. The role of media in covering such crimes also grew. Newspapers, radio, and later television actively covered the progress of the investigation. This helped police, people called with information, shared observations. But there was also a downside. Sometimes information turned out to be false. Self-appointed detectives appeared who interfered with the work of professionals. The case continued to live in the public space even after the active phase of the investigation ended. Articles, books came out, programs were created. Each new generation of journalists and researchers tried to find something new, offer their own version of events. Interest in the case intensified, especially after Morris's death in 2014. Many believed that now, when he was dead, new evidence would appear. Someone from his circle would decide to tell what they knew, but were afraid to say during the suspect's lifetime. But nothing substantial surfaced. If Morris did share his secrets with anyone, these people took them with them. A philosophical question this case raises: what's worse, knowing that the perpetrator has been found but can't be punished due to lack of evidence, or not knowing at all who committed the crime? The victims' families found themselves in the first situation. They, like many in the police, were certain they knew who the killer was, but couldn't achieve justice. This is a special form of torment when you see a person free, knowing that he possibly killed your child. On the other hand, some lawyers and human rights advocates pointed out that a person cannot be called guilty without a court verdict. Presumption of innocence is a cornerstone of the legal system. Morris was convicted of other crimes, but not of murders. Officially, he was not the Cannock Chase killer. This creates a complex ethical situation. If you look at the timeline of events, you can notice a certain periodicity. First disappearance in January, first discovery in August, second disappearance and discovery in September of the same year, third disappearance and discovery in August of the following year. Summer months, warm weather, children spend more time outside. This is a typical pattern for crimes against children. Perpetrators use the time when they have more opportunities to meet a potential victim in a vulnerable situation. Morris, working as a construction engineer, was especially mobile in summer. Construction work intensifies in warm weather. This gave him a reason to drive around the area, be in different places, without arousing suspicion. His car was seen in many places, but this was explainable by his profession. The automobile in general plays a key role in this case. In the 1960s, not everyone had a car, especially in the provinces. The fact that the perpetrator used an automobile narrowed the circle of suspects. Police compiled lists of all owners of gray Austin A55s in the region. Morris was on this list, but not the only one. Each was checked. Alibis sought motives. Why specifically a gray Austin A55? Witnesses described a car of this color and model. But one must understand that witness testimony, especially concerning automobiles, can be inaccurate. People confuse models, colors, especially if they saw the car briefly, in a stressful situation, or remember after time. Perhaps the car was a different make or color. This is one reason why focusing only on Austin owners could have been a mistake. Nevertheless, Morris's car runs through the entire investigation like a red thread. He was seen in it near crime scenes. He himself admitted that he drove in those areas. But again, admitting that he was there doesn't equal admitting to murder. Another aspect worth considering is how society changed under the influence of such crimes. The 1960s were a time of major social change. The conservative way of life of the post-war years was receding into the past. Society was becoming more open. But simultaneously with this, a sense of anxiety also grew. Events like the Cannock Chase murders fed people's fears, made them think the world was becoming more dangerous. In reality, statistics don't confirm that crime sharply increased in the 1960s. But people's perception was precisely that. Media actively covered high-profile cases, which created an impression of an epidemic of violence. This influenced people's behavior. Politics demands on law enforcement. The Cannock Chase murders became a symbol of lost innocence. Before this, people believed that their quiet provincial corner was protected from major troubles, that the horrors written about in newspapers happened somewhere far away in big cities. But when it happened here, in their forest, on their streets, the illusion of safety collapsed. The Staffordshire police, after this case, were never the same again. They learned lessons, sometimes painful ones. They understood that they needed to be prepared for the worst scenarios, that perpetrators could be among those who looked completely ordinary, that investigation must be systematic, that not a single detail should be missed. Were there mistakes in the investigation? Undoubtedly. There's always something that could have been done better, especially looking back. Perhaps they should have focused on Morris earlier, conducted a search before he managed to destroy evidence. Perhaps they should have used the press more widely, more actively called for witnesses. But judging with hindsight is easy. In real time, in the chaos of investigation, when there's too much and too little information simultaneously, making the right decisions is difficult. The victims of this case aren't only the three girls, though of course they are first and foremost. The victims were their families, who never recovered from the loss. Victims were other children of that time, who lost their freedom and carefree childhood because parents could no longer allow them to walk alone. The victim was the entire community, which lost its sense of security. And what can be said about the perpetrator himself, whoever he was? This was a person who lived among people, possibly had a family, job, friends. A person who in the morning went to work, greeted neighbors, and then abducted and killed children. This double life, this ability to divide oneself into public and secret parts, one of the most frightening aspects of such crimes. Psychologists studying serial killers speak of compartmentalization, the ability to separate one aspect of life from another, not allowing them to mix. The perpetrator could be a loving husband, good worker, but this part of his personality existed separately from that dark part that committed terrible things. Could these murders have been prevented? If someone had noticed warning signs earlier, if someone had reported strange behavior, perhaps yes. But the reality is that many serial criminals are very skilled at hiding their true nature. They look normal, behave normally, until an opportunity presents itself to commit a crime. After Morris, other suspects periodically appeared. From time to time, police received information about other people who could be involved. Each such lead was checked, but nothing concrete was found. Most of these people either had ironclad alibis or had no relation to the case at all. There was even a version that the killer died soon after the last crime, which would explain the cessation of the series. Perhaps he was in an accident, died from illness, committed suicide. They checked lists of deceased in the period from late 1968 to early 1970s, looked for suitable candidates. But this direction also led nowhere. The internet added a new dimension to discussion of old, unsolved cases. Forums, blogs appeared where enthusiasts discuss theories, share information, try to find what police missed. The Cannock Chase case is no exception. Entire communities exist dedicated to these murders, where people argue about versions, analyze facts. Some of these amateur detectives really do find interesting things. They connect facts in new ways, pay attention to details that others missed. But most such investigations still remain at the level of speculation. Without access to complete case materials, without the ability to conduct official examinations, it's difficult to reach definite conclusions. Police react to such activity differently. On one hand, sometimes really useful information comes from the public. On the other hand, time must be spent checking countless theories, most of which turn out to be groundless. The Cannock Chase case remains officially open. This means that if new evidence appears, the investigation can be resumed. Police haven't closed the case, haven't declared it unsolvable. Theoretically, it could be solved at any moment. But with each year, the probability of this decreases. Witnesses age and die, memory fades, physical evidence degrades. Even modern technologies aren't omnipotent. If initially not enough material was collected, then the most sophisticated analysis methods won't help. Hope remains for a confession, for someone who knows the truth to finally decide to tell it. But even this hope is fading. If the perpetrator was Morris, he took the secret to his grave. If it was someone else, he's either also dead or guards the secret so well that he'll never tell. What does this case tell us about the nature of evil? That it can hide behind an ordinary face, that monsters don't always look like monsters, that sometimes justice isn't achieved, that criminals escape punishment not because the system doesn't work, but because they're simply lucky, or smart enough, or circumstances work in their favor. This is a bitter truth that's hard to accept. We want to believe that good always triumphs over evil, that criminals always get what they deserve. But reality is more complex. Sometimes evil remains unpunished. Sometimes victims don't receive justice, and we have to live with this knowledge. The families of the three girls lived their whole lives with this incompleteness. For them, there was no moment of relief when they could say, "There he is. The killer got his due. Justice prevailed." Instead, they lived with suspicions, doubts, the pain of not knowing. Some of the relatives devoted years to keeping the case visible, not letting it be forgotten. They gave interviews, participated in documentaries, met with journalists. They hoped that publicity would help, that someone would remember something important, that a new lead would appear. Their persistence deserves respect. In their position, many would have broken down, withdrawn into themselves, tried to forget. But they chose another path, the path of fighting for memory of their daughters, for their case not to be forgotten. Christine Darby, Diane Tift, Margaret Reynolds. 3 names, 3 lives, cut short at the very beginning. They deserve to be remembered not only as victims, but as children who had dreams, plans, a future, who loved their parents, played with friends, went to school, rejoiced in simple things. The killer took away their future, took away their opportunity to grow up, create families, find their place in the world. This is a crime not only against them themselves, but against everyone who could have been part of their lives, against children who weren't born, against people they could have helped, against the contribution they could have made to the world. This is where the true tragedy of such crimes lies. They steal not only lives, but everything that could have been, all possibilities, all potential joys and achievements. This is a loss that's impossible to measure, impossible to fully comprehend. Cannock Chase today is a peaceful place. Families visit, tourists walk, local residents jog. The forest lives its life. Nature has healed the scars. But for those who know the history, this place will forever bear the imprint of tragedy. There are places where memory of what happened is stronger. Small memorials installed by relatives or concerned people. Flowers that someone regularly brings. These signs say that the girls weren't forgotten, that their short lives mattered. In a broader context, the Cannock Chase case became part of British criminal history, along with other famous unsolved cases. It's studied by criminology students, mentioned in textbooks, analyzed by experts. Not as simply a set of facts, but as an example of what problems justice faces, what questions remain unanswered. For Britain, the 1960s became a turning point in terms of awareness of the problem of crimes against children. Before this, society preferred not to think about such things, to believe that this was rare, an exception. But a series of murders like Cannock Chase, as well as other high-profile cases of that time, forced recognition that the problem was real and required a systematic approach. Specialized child protection programs were created, methods of working with victims were improved, investigation protocols were developed. All this is partly the result of those tragic events. A sad but important lesson for society. One could say that the memory of these girls helped protect other children, that their deaths weren't completely in vain if they led to changes that saved lives. This is weak consolation for their families, but still it's something. We're approaching the end of this narrative, but the story essentially has no ending. There's no resolution, no closure. There are only questions, assumptions, incomplete answers. This leaves a feeling of dissatisfaction, a desire to know more, to understand what really happened. Perhaps someday new technologies will appear that will allow extracting information from old evidence in ways we can only dream of today. Perhaps someone left a letter that will be discovered after death, with a confession and details. Perhaps something completely unexpected will happen that will shed light on this mystery. Until then, we can only remember. Remember Christine, Diane, and Margaret. Remember how fragile life is, how important vigilance is, how valuable each clue in an investigation is. Remember that evil exists, but we must not allow it to win, must not stop seeking truth. The Cannock Chase murders aren't just a criminal story. This is a lesson about human nature, about the justice system, about memory and forgetting. This is a reminder that some questions remain unanswered, but that doesn't mean we should stop asking them. Thank you for listening to this story to the end. It's heavy, dark, leaving a bitter aftertaste. But such stories need to be told, need to be remembered, not to enjoy the horror, but so we don't forget about the victims, about the importance of justice, about the fact that the fight for truth never ends. This was an episode of Fear Files. Thank you for being with us.